and welcome to Diverse and Inclusive Leaders, the show where I interview the most inspirational and thought-provoking leaders of today and unearth their unique stories of diversity and inclusion to help inspire, educate and motivate others to make the world a better place. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Yulia O'Mahony. Yulia has had a wealth of experience within the inclusion and also the well-being field, which is particularly poignant, I think, today, given the circumstances that we are living in. But I'm delighted to have Yulia on the show because she's had some really fantastic experience and is very, very passionate indeed when it comes to unlocking that transformational change. She's got a real firm focus when it comes to unlocking human potential and improving productivity. She's a real believer when it comes to diversity and inclusion and the fact that this is absolutely critical to commercial success. She's also a disruptor and an influencer when it comes to board level and C-suite individuals. And of course, has worked for a number of well-renowned companies, most recently working as the head of diversity, inclusion and wellbeing for the John Lewis Partnership. She's also worked as vice president for Alex Partners and also worked formally in the consulting sphere for a number of years before embarking into the corporate world. Welcome to the show, Yulia.
Thank you so much, Leila. It's great to talk to you in this sunny morning, in this unprecedented times, as we keep saying.
It is indeed, and it is such a beautiful day outside. You kind of almost would not believe that there is such a world crisis going on. And I guess before we head into the podcast, it makes sense for us absolutely to kind of mention the coronavirus. And I guess in light with the career that you've had, now almost is the time where well-being comes into play first and foremost, almost. So talk to me a little about some of the experiences that you've had around kind of coronavirus, and then we'll dive into well-being and inclusion and get on with today's show.
Fantastic. Thank you, Leila. And I think it's interesting for me to reflect on coronavirus and generally what's obviously not coronavirus itself, but it's the effect it has on physical, mental health, but also on companies. And also thinking from companies' perspective, all company boards will be in crisis mode. So everyone would set up their crisis response task force. And it's definitely not business as usual at the moment. So, and I know a lot of my colleagues in previous consulting world, in particular Alex Partners, which is actually a specialist in turnaround and crisis management. It is a very difficult moment, but at the same time, it's as all crisis, you need to maintain a resolve, and this is a real testing time for the leadership, because then you need to give people some positivity, and the positivity, not kind of false positivity because you want to tell the truth, but it's about showing that you're confident that all crises will pass and you arrive in a better place, but you need to look after your people as well. So that's why well-being is becoming so important, is because how companies behave in this moment will definitely show the employees what it is that they're made of, because you can talk about values, but it is what is lived through and the experiences of the employees, but also how they respond to customers, what is communicated to them, how companies communicate. It would be, I think it would be a real litmus test of the company leadership and their approach to well-being. Mm-hmm. And I think in terms of the things like inclusivity, belonging, that would be also something that would play on people's minds as well. But I think on the positive side, which I think would we hopefully come out stronger out of this situation, is because what you see is a lot of involvement in community spirit, helping people, bridging divides and opinions, and it just looking after your fellow citizens. And there's a lot of spontaneous task force set up locally to help elderly neighbors. There's some food delivery and food banks for those who may be affected by free school meals. So it's just, there's a lot of positive things that are coming through in society, which hopefully would also help in the future our inclusivity agenda as well, because it's not about how different you are. It's almost like we're all human, we all have issues, we all, everybody's scared, everybody is stressed, everyone is in a completely different mode of operation, because you work from home, your kids are there because they're not in school, you're worried about your elderly relatives. So it's really difficult time for everybody. And also businesses are thinking, well, you may run out of cash in 3 months' time because no one is buying anything. So it's just, the stresses are amplified on so many different levels. So company and leadership, I definitely feel for all the leaders and CEOs, because it is incredibly difficult time. So I hope they do look after their mental health.
Mm-hmm. I absolutely concur with you there. And picking up on, the silver lining almost that you mentioned and positive point, firstly, I do think that we definitely, as you said, will come out stronger from this. But, I also think it is, it's a demonstration really of the wonderful side of humanity, where, as you say, everyone is human, everyone is flesh and blood, as I often say. And, almost a crisis like this really puts everything into perspective, where we realize actually we all need to eat, we all need to drink, we all need to look after our minds, we all need to look after our families. We all need to look after our colleagues and make sure that we can continue to thrive when we come out of this unprecedented time. And so, all the pieces there that you mentioned, incredibly valid. And I guess now moving on into the core of the podcast, of course. And, I'd love perhaps for you to be able to share with some of our listeners the story of how you came to be where you are today. And of course, I've been very lucky and privileged to be able to get to know you better, not only within, kind of face-to-face workshops. I know we've had lunch and things like that together, and you've had a really interesting kind of international actually background. And I wonder whether, before we get going into kind of conversations around well-being, which I know you're super passionate about, whether you could share with all of our listeners actually how you came to be where you are today, and what it was that really motivated you to take up a career in such an intriguing space.
Thank you, Leila. Yeah, and as you said, we had very interesting lunches covering the world issues and how you can solve them. But it's I'm probably unusual in some ways for well-being. Well, who is usual for well-being space? It's such an interesting emerging field in itself, and also diversity and inclusion in generally the space related to people. But I have more of a commercial consulting background, as you mentioned before. I started my career with Bain & Company in Russia, which interestingly enough was going through quite a lot of change. So some of the, you can see some of the completely different context, but when I left university, Soviet Union completely disintegrated. So there was, again, there was this new economic order was taking place, which was painful in some ways, exciting in other ways. But things, and I think what gives me comfort is from that experience, there's always, the humanity always comes through somehow. Even if you think you don't know how things are going to work, somehow they do work out. Then it's, working through the moment of change was very, very interesting, but it also allowed me to travel internationally. And I spent quite a lot of time in the States. So I worked in San Francisco offices of Bain & Company, but then I also worked in Boston. And it was a fantastic insight into how the companies operated, because I wanted to learn from the best practice in America and understand what it is that that works very well. Well, it was 30 years ago. So I think everybody will be rethinking their approach to economic order in a wholesale way.
It's fascinating though, all that international experience. And obviously, you've worked for now a reasonable amount of time in London. What has been your observations when it comes to actually going across these different borders from Russia, the Soviet Union, and the American way of doing business, which again, and I have an American husband, and so I always find it fascinating when I'm dealing with Americans versus kind of the UK. But what have been some of your key observations across borders?
Hmm. I think it's from previous experience, and I guess it's just you have to make this disclaimer because you feel that the tectonic plates are moving as
Yeah.
but it's what I find. Well, we're all humans, as you said, Leila. We're all very, very similar. It's just, and I think some of the cultural approaches, cultural codes are different, but fundamentally we all want to belong, we all want to be loved, we all want to be part of something bigger. So I think fundamental drivers, they don't really change. It's how people tend to channel their energy is quite different, and also what is perceived as acceptable in one culture doesn't translate into another. And I think it's that what creates this animosity, because you almost think, somebody looked at me in a different way and it means this because I interpret it with my cultural reference, and it just creates a lack of trust. And I think it's also people tend to look for the confirmation of their point of view rather than divergence, because no one is comfortable with divergence and uncertainty. And so unfortunately we tend to create these echo chambers for ourselves and think, this group of people is X, or this group of people is Y. And I think previously my observations of American versus, say, British culture were that Americans tend to be more accepting but less tolerant, and Brits are more tolerant but less accepting.
Interesting.
What I meant, and again, it may completely change, but it's and I think generally there was this. Probably it's because it's much older society and older country and very established rules, which you still have monarchy and all this sort of stuff. But I think it was more about we're prepared to tolerate different cultures, but it's not about mixing and learning from each other. It's just allowing people to do something in their particular way, whereas in America it tended to be more melting pot approach. So it's like, as long as you accept our values and as long as you want to live the American dream, then it's we can accept you, again, within reason. So I think it's just, it was my top line, very amateur anthropological observation.
No, it makes absolute sense. It makes absolute sense. And I think, to use your terminology, the American dream, and my goodness, what an American dream it is. It's, I spent some time over in the States, and actually the longest I spent over in the States was over Christmas this year. And, the culture, it's funny because it's so similar in some ways, yet it is so incredibly different. Everything is kind of, it's almost louder and slightly more brash, but certainly not scared to speak out about their heart and what their beliefs are. But yeah, no, it's you kind of surmised it, almost there very, very, very well, with this kind of melting pot approach. And I just hope that we can, I'm sure that we can, as a nation in the UK, continue to welcome everyone from all different walks of life, despite Brexit and the likes,
Yeah, and actually I have my American family, which lives near Boston, and so we used to go there with my son every summer, but now obviously it's
on lockdown. Yes,
but it's very interesting also to observe different groups of or how America reacts to this crisis in particular. And as I said, I'm really hoping that it would help us come out in a much better, stronger way out of this crisis. and rethink. And again, fundamentally, I sense we need to rethink our economic policy, which is not new news. And it's some fantastic economists, actually female economists, interestingly enough, they were talking about it for probably last 10 years. But I think finally, I hope that the powers that be would listen to it now.
Mm-hmm. I certainly do as well. And, I guess before we kind of, get into the lightning round, which you've heard me do, I'm sure, on many different podcasts, so you probably know what is ahead. I wondered, talk to me kind of about, what diversity, inclusion and belonging really means to you. Because I know that sometimes can mean slightly different things to different people. But given that you're an expert, I'm curious to kind of hear your thoughts. If this is, say, the first time someone's tuning into the podcast and wondering what this D&I and B is all about, but equally, if it is someone who's tuning in who is an expert, what does this really mean, and what does the future hold for diversity, inclusion and belonging?
Yes, thank you, Leila. And I think that I'd use the expression I've heard from someone, so I probably will misattribute, but it summarizes it really, really well. So it's one of my favorite expressions relating to diversity, inclusion, and belonging. So diversity is being invited to a party, inclusion is being invited to dance, and belonging is being able to change the music. And I think it's really, really important, the distinction, because it's like, if quite obviously, if you just invited to the party, but you don't feel you're part of what's going on, you're not likely to contribute to your full potential. And belonging, obviously, just if you sense something is wrong, you're able to speak up, and you're able to actually to alter the course of the party, so to speak. And this is the most important element of diversity, inclusion, and belonging. And this is why I'm so passionate about it, because we need, especially now, we need all the creativity and innovation and the best ideas as we can get, because of all the different things that are going on in the world. And even before the crisis happened with coronavirus, we have climate emergency, we have so many different issues facing humanity's existence almost. And in this environment, you just need to you can't continue with business as usual. You need to have new creative ideas. And to get these ideas, you need people who are different, who think differently, who can work in teams differently. Mm-hmm. And I think it's also the emergence of a team in, again, hopefully it will come to pass in the recent, in the aftermath of the crisis. But it's about the teams of different individuals who feel they can contribute, and they are contributing to their fullest potential, so they can solve problems that people thought they wouldn't be able to solve.
Mm-hmm. That makes absolute sense. And it's that eclectic mix of different minds and different cultures, different backgrounds, that really do breed innovation ultimately. And like you quite rightly said, this world is changing so incredibly quickly that we really need to harness talent that comes from all different walks of life, because ultimately, how else will we survive? Already we're starting to see it, massively in the kind of disparity between the different, ages. It comes to kind of millennials and their way of learning, their way of engaging. It's very, very different to that, almost that archetypal leader of yesteryear. And so you're absolutely right. We really do need to kind of embrace that diverse mixture of individuals around a table, or a boardroom table, when it comes to leaders. And one other thing I wanted to ask you, just on the point specifically of wellness, because you are such an expert in this area, I'm sure most businesses are doing this already, and if they're not, they're definitely thinking about it right now due to COVID-19. What are any kind of top tips that we might be able to implement, whether it be as business leaders or whether it be as individuals?
So well-being, I think you're absolutely right. A lot of companies are doing something about well-being in particular. But I think, in my experience, for any well-being initiatives, or diversity inclusion initiatives, or any people-related initiatives that do not involve actual work, what you need to have is the three components that work in perfect or some sort of harmony, not necessarily perfect harmony. First, you need to have CEO commitment and also general boardroom buy-in at the personal level, that they feel it is important. And it's important, and I think personal reason is quite an important distinction, because it's not just because you think if you look after your people, it's generally good for you. It's through some personal experience, people feel that, you know, if they lost a loved one or they had some sort of volunteering experience, they feel that it is an important business mission in addition to making profit. So it's not just about productivity, it's personal. And also that the executive team is willing and able to role model these behaviors. So in terms of how they interact with their teams, what they allow and celebrate in terms of flexible working, how they work as a team, if they send emails at every hour, God sends. So it all sends very, very clear signals. And I know it sounds obvious, but a lot of people have blind spots related to their personal behavior. It's almost like we look after people, but I can do what I can do because can be invincible.
So I absolutely agree. And, you know, while simple, it's something that a lot of people don't adopt. You know, it is, it's like parenting, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, you must set an example, because that is what sends, like you said, a very, very clear message down the rest of the organization.
No, absolutely. So you need to have that. Also, you need to have the other element, you need to have a movement. So you need to have a movement from ground up. So people feeling empowered and also supported to do something with their for their personal well-being within their teams. So it needs to be a team thing. So you can have challenges, and we have amazing John Lewis shop in Leeds that used to do star jumps almost every morning, and they would blast really fun music on the tannoy before they opened the shop, and they all did some sort of exercises. But what was interesting, it's really tiny, it's really simple, it's not particularly complicated. Some people grumbled at first, but then everybody joined in eventually. But it set completely different tone, because everybody was doing it. The head of branch was jumping up and down. It was a little bit silly, a little bit funny, but it was an exercise. And when you come into the shop after it was open, the energy was very different. It was palpable that it was different vibe. And I think it's almost like, and they continue doing more and more and more. But it's kind of, you start small and then this movement grows. And it's not because somebody told them to do that. It's because they wanted to do it and because they felt empowered. And in the middle, you have very important element as well, is you need to support this movement and the board commitment through HR processes, policies, interventions, and some sort of additional support that would be needed to connect these two things together. Also, that would involve things like line manager or people manager development and training, in terms of what it means to be line manager for this particular company, because this is what would set the culture, in addition to things like, you know, gym membership and other things. Because what I've observed, there's a lot of companies, they either stop at HR provision level, so they do just the initiatives such as gym memberships and, you know, free apples in the canteen. But what it doesn't do, it doesn't engage people either at the top level, or it doesn't start a movement. And you need to have a combination of all these different elements working together.
Those are some fantastic tips there. And what you're ultimately saying is, first of all, small things can actually make a huge difference. I love that example about the star jumps. I think that's absolutely fantastic. And, you know, again, the piece about getting real buy-in from the top is absolutely critical. And I think organizations and staff and kind of customers alike can really see if the CEO is not genuine about their intentions, because it does, like you say, it filters down. And D&I, there is, as you well know, there's not one silver bullet, is there? It has to be implemented CEO, middle-level management, grassroots level, not just through the basic fundamentals like gym membership and, apples at the canteen, like you say. So thank you very much for sharing that, Yulia. And just before we run out of time for today, I know that you know what is next is the lightning round. I'm going to give you 30 seconds to answer each of the following questions, starting with, what is your secret to success, if there is one?
Well, define success. It's obviously it's very to say what the secret is, but I think the most important thing is to find your purpose and passion and persevere in the face of challenges, and also find your support network that would help you ride through difficult moments. So I think that's basically it.
Great answer, great answer. And what about any inspirations, or the key inspirations that you've had throughout your career, whether it be personally or professionally, in fact?
I think I had some sort of quite a weird, I guess, inspiration. It's from my Russian background. It's one of the most inspiring leaders I came across is not a very well-known figure. His name is Sergei Korolev.
Sergei Carlos.
Korolev. I think it's Sergei Korolev in English, how you pronounce it. But he was leading Russian space program in the 60s. So it's largely due to him that Russia was the first to send the Sputnik, and that's why Sputnik is called satellite. Sputnik was one of the first Russian words that came out. I think what was really interesting about his approach, because the Russian program was disadvantaged compared to the States, and interestingly enough, I read about it in a book that was written by an American space rocket scientist, because out of respect for this individual, because though disadvantaged, he managed to inspire people through his mission to put men in space and explore something that wasn't explored before. So he was just curious about how you can go beyond what people are doing at the moment. So this curiosity was so infectious that he managed to pull off absolutely amazing things, and people would walk on water, not walk on water, walk through the desert for him, because he was such an purpose-driven individual. So for him, it was more of he saw this high purpose, and then he managed to assemble a great team that would then accomplish amazing feats of human curiosity, I guess.
Wow. And that's a really interesting one there, actually, on higher purpose. And I think we all spend our life thinking about that higher purpose and why are we here. And we talked a lot today about kind of humankind and kind of the fact that we are all the same almost inside. We also are very, very unique, and we all need to have a purpose in our life to almost keep us driven, I guess, as well.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting. It's how you set the vision that is not, it's something beyond just making money. So if you set your vision, it will be the most profitable company. No company would do that, obviously, for obvious reasons, but it's just some sort of bigger mission. And it was articulated much better by Simon Sinek when he was talking about Start With Why. But it's also amazing how many leaders actually forget it, or they think it's less important to share this vision and inspire, not just share their vision, but inspire people and bring them along, because this is very important as well. Because it's one thing you have this amazing idea, but you need to bring people with you. Mm-hmm. And it's a lot harder than just intellectual, thinking about what the future might look like. It's how you get people to follow you as well.
Mm-hmm.
It's quite a trick.
Mm.
And I think that's what set apart amazing leaders of in the future years is, and not just the intellectual power, but the ability to relate to people and listen and, adjust their course.
Absolutely. I am a strong believer as well in almost what you've just said there actually is I think that the future will be about leaders who have the heart. I think someone said that right now it's about intelligence, but in the future it will be about the heart when it comes to digital AI, everything like that. Many things will be able to be emulated, but the one thing that can't be emulated is empathy and the fact that we are leading with our heart. And so I'm also a very big Simon Sinek fan as well. Start With Why is an absolutely brilliant book. So again, I concur. And finally, I wondered if you were to be able to kind of go back and give the young Yulia advice from a number of years ago and actually talk to her right now, what advice might you give to her or to anyone who is listening in who is kind of about to embark on their future career?
It's a very good question, Leila, because I've been thinking about it for some time. And but to be honest, even thinking about my younger self, it's very difficult to remember your younger self because so much passed. But I think the most important thing is, as I said before, is just to find your purpose, to find your mission, and don't get discouraged too easily by some kind of bumps on the road. And I think it's also the other thing which is becoming more important is invest a lot of time in building relationships and friends. Because one thing is to kind of believe in yourself and not be easily discouraged. I mean, the power of grit is also well documented in a fantastic book that explained that actually road to success, what you need most is grit rather than intellect or anything else. But it's also the relationships. And I think in the world as it's evolving, relationships will become even more important because when you seek your psychological safety, you need to rely on network of your friends, and you need to rely on network of different individuals as well, not just friends, your close friends. Because then, to what we spoke about earlier, Leila, it's about seeking and being able to listen to different opinions. It's just developing this ability to listen and ability to connect, and developing compassion. And this is something that should tide us over in the future years. And I think it's also, I'm just reading a fascinating book by Margaret Heffernan called Uncharted, which was the incredible timing and when this book came out. But it's all about this, as you said, it's about the heart, it's about the empathy, it's about being able to work through problems together, because the issues that we're facing in the world, it's like everybody needs to participate in solving them, and you can't solve them just through process, or anything like that. You need to have conversation, because you don't know what will come out at the end of this conversation. And I think we all know the best conversations we had is when we're prepared to listen and actually change their opinion as a result of it, or change the way we're doing something. Because if you just have a meeting for everybody to agree, it's almost like, what's the point of having the meeting?
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And, that's such a lovely way, I think, actually, to end today's podcast. And it's been really insightful, Yulia, having you on the show. I know I said when we had lunch last time, we should be podcasting right now. And so I'm glad that we actually have finally done this podcast. So thank you very much for being here with me today and with all of our listeners as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Leila.
You're very welcome. And in summary, which I won't do too much for a long summary because I know there's so many nuggets of wisdom in there. Some of the things that really stood out to me actually were your top tips and advice when it comes to inclusion. Number one, CEO commitment and boardroom buy-in, absolutely critical. So if you're listening in thinking, how do I start? Get buy-in from the CEO and from the leaders, because if they really truly buy in, you'll find it filters down so much more easily, as Yulia has said. Also, the person and the productivity is absolutely critical, almost more so than profit, which of course will follow, but person and productivity as well as role modeling behavior is absolutely critical, because if you're not doing it as a leader, how can you ever expect anyone else to be able to do that for you? And finally, I really love the piece there about movement. People really feeling empowered to do something with their teams. And sometimes starting small can actually be the biggest piece of difference that you're going to make. And I know that I'm going to be re-quoting you here, Yulia, with the Star Jumps piece at your John Lewis store in Leeds, because I think that's just fantastic. What a way to really kind of drive and cultivate energy before opening the doors to the world for the day ahead. I think that's really fantastic. So thank you once again. For those who are listening in, as usual, you can tune in via Apple, Spotify, or any of your favorite podcast apps. I will put all of the show notes on from today's show with the lovely Yulia onto our website, so you can check those out at www.dialglobal.org/podcast or www.leilamckenzie.com/podcast. Yulia is also on LinkedIn as well, and Twitter, I believe. So if there are any questions that you have, or you have any questions for me that you want me to pass on to Yulia, please do feel free to reach out. She's an expert when it comes to wellbeing and diversity and inclusion. So make sure you do reach out to her and stay connected, stay safe up until next week when we see you all again soon. My name is Leila Mackenzie-Dellis. You've been listening to Yulia O'Mahony and myself today on the Diverse and Inclusive Leaders podcast show, and I will look forward to seeing you again very, very soon. Bye for now. Thank you so much for watching the Diverse and Inclusive Leaders podcast. Please do feel free to hit the like button below, or if you'd like to receive future notifications, do ping the notification bell here at the side. If you're interested in the audio version only, you can find it on the following streaming platforms. Any extra info and descriptions will be in the links below. Look forward to seeing you soon.